Welcome to Change the Conversation with the Hopefulist. My name is Wendy McClure, and it's time we had a conversation about living in a patriarchy and how that affects our lives. Together, we can make a difference and change the conversation. Hello, and welcome back to Change the Conversation with the Hopefulist. We've had some pretty interesting news in the last couple of days. I have a guest today. Emily Long is joining me. She is a feminist, an activist, and we're going to be talking about the exciting news that Biden has stepped aside. We have Kamala Harris now, who has stepped up to the plate. And what were Emily, thank you for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, she's a repeat guest, by the way. So we'll have to check out her former guest spot. What was your first inclination when this went down on that Sunday afternoon?
Oh, well, for about a couple weeks prior, there had been the push initially for Biden to drop out that he dismissed and said, no, I'm staying in, no, I'm staying in. And then there was the news that they were definitely considering and we would know by the end of the weekend. And that gave me pause that something had seriously changed. I was very on the fence about what I wanted to go with because it was a very complicated strategy decision. It's a super risky decision. Either way, it was a risky decision. And so I had been doing some research on, the various legal issues that the Heritage Foundation and other conservative groups had been proposing should Biden step down. And while a lot of them I think will be dead on arrival, I think their strategy is going to be to flood the court system with them. And if they can get anything to stick, they're throwing shit at the wall. And if anything can stick, it could be very detrimental to a key swing state or something like that, right? And trusting the court system right now is a very hit or miss because we have Biden appointees, but we also still have those fresh Trump appointees from not that long ago either. So if there's rogue Eileen Cannons on the bench wherever they're filing stuff, you never know, right? But based on what's come out since this has happened on various legal analysis of their strategy, it doesn't sound like it's anything to worry too much about until it is, in parentheses, until it is. But that was the thing that worried me the most. I was never a Biden loyalist necessarily. I was going to vote blue no matter who in this election. That goes either way, whether it was Biden on the ticket or not. I did think that if he did step down, it would have to be Kamala because it would make the legal challenges the weakest for the Republican Party because they should be able to transfer the funds to her because she is on the name.
Right.
So they have the war chest. They have still filed with the FEC challenges to that. They've already filed that, but it's a reach. If it was going to somebody completely brand new, I think they would have a case, but going to Harris, since it was campaign funds to Biden and Harris and her name is on the account, it's like, how can you argue? You know what I mean? And then just with the primaries and everything else, I think they're doing everything by the book. I would hope that they're careful enough to do everything by the book. From what I've read, it only sounds like Ohio might be an issue related to their state ballot procedures that might make things mucky. But overall, I think that given how much support has flooded in since that announcement, I think it was probably the right decision. Now, I didn't know that prior to them making the decision. So you couldn't say. It's like, you pull the trigger and you see what happens, right? And it worked well to our advantage. So initially my first reaction was, oh my God, I was just ready for disaster, potentially. Just that's where my brain goes with everything. And then when I saw that I was suddenly hope scrolling on Threads and Instagram and everything else and the flood of support and how much money she raised, I went, no, this was the right call. I do believe it was the right call. And I'm very excited about working on that campaign. So
yeah, I have to tell you, initially I was very upset. I really, really hesitate for the reason that I'm not sure that this country is ready to elect a woman, let alone a Black Asian woman. The only thing we have going for us is it's a post-Roe world.
Right.
So I have to say I am very excited to see the rallying around her, the money that has come in, and just the feeling of hope because I did not expect that. Like I was devastated when it
Yeah.
happened. I had already had like a really bad day. Like one thing after another was happening and then
Hmm.
I'm sitting in my porch and all of a sudden I get a text message and I'm like, Biden's out.
Yeah.
I'm just like
No, I know that feeling. And I remember I remember just sitting there going, I just have to watch and see how this plays out because my fears, I felt like the fears that people had of him dropping out, very legitimate. And this is a very risky decision for the reasons that, we don't know if the country is ready for him. But then I think about it, and I think back to 2016 when we still had Roe. We still had Roe that everybody took for granted for so long that even many conservatives were like, no, it's not going anywhere. And then it did. Hillary was right about everything. It's kind of how everything boiled out, right?
yeah.
And then there was always a lot of stigma around Hillary Clinton too. And then there was the issue related to the nomination process and the Bernie Bros who could not back her. But then at the end of the day, she still won 3 million more votes. In the Electoral College, the number of votes in the Electoral College that gave it to Trump instead was tiny in comparison. It was a fraction of that. And so I do think even in 2016, we were ready, but the system didn't accommodate it. And so I think if the strategy is well put together for those same issues, because we still have the Electoral College, we're still going to have those same hurdles to get through. If the strategy is different, we can tackle it differently, but also we have a bunch of women completely fired up. They've published their plan for what they want to do to us. And that 55% of white women who voted against Hillary, you are not going to be the exception to their rules, and your leash is not going to be that long under a Republican administration. And so I think I do have hope that we'll get enough of them to rally and to be in formation and just understand the assignment. So,
Well, and here's, I've seen a lot already is the internalized misogyny that so many
oh,
women
absolutely.
have.
Mm-hmm.
Just bashing Harris about this, that, calling her evil, saying that she, the way she got to the top and all this stuff. I mean, like, I would think that every woman would be outraged at those kind
Yeah.
of comments, but they're not. They're the
Yeah.
ones saying them. So, why do you think it is? How is it just so deeply ingrained that they have really believe that men are more qualified? Or do you think it's more like they're just not that woman?
Well, I think that they're not honest with themselves about their own misogyny and their own racism. And especially in this election when you've got both at play, right? A lot of women are not honest with themselves about their own internalized misogyny. And part of it is it's so deeply ingrained and it's so internalized. If they're raised within purity culture, if they're raised in a patriarchal household, if they're raised with that's all they know. And so when they look at women and they look at what they perceive to be the right way to do something and the wrong way to do something, there's also there's a lot of jealousy. There's a lot of I mean, white women especially, do not have a sisterhood. We do not have the kind of banded together, like, we have a lot of jealousy and resentment for one another.
Competition.
We have, quite frankly, a lot of us hate each other.
Yeah.
And so it's not only that we have this internalized misogyny against for women in general, we just don't have um the kind of interpersonal relationships with other women that really help us empathize with them and really help us, like, we didn't women by and large have always been victims of oppression under the patriarchy, right? But white women by and large have always had the longest leash under that patriarchy, and as long as they've remained obedient to it, they can live these cushy lifestyles. And plenty of people have content lives even under authoritarian governments, even under oppressive households and stuff. They have comfortable lives until it really comes down and affects them, and they realize that they hate them too, that the patriarchy they value their obedience, they don't value them as people. And so when they have conflated that valuing their obedience to their valuing them as people, it takes a lot to bring that to the surface and make them realize that they don't the men in this situation don't actually see them as equals and don't actually see them as people. So they help pit them against other women, against the women that try to point that out, against the women that want to break the glass ceilings and bust down the doors and stuff like that. They want their women to see those women as the problem. And so they've been very effective, very, very effective at deeply ingraining that into their perception of how we operate within society and what our rules and expectations are and yada yada.
Yeah, that was explained beautifully because, like, that's what I always say is since I've become very vocal about my feminism and activism, I am painted to be this horrific, evil person who's just a troublemaker and a man basher when all I'm trying to do is say, look, we're not being treated the same. They're pitting us, they're making us take the blame for everything that happens. They have it set up that we take the blame for our own sexual assaults. I mean, like, it's so ridiculous. And when you point that out, you get the backlash. And again, that is, because, the patriarchy wants that to be a punishment for you, but you're also an example to other women. This is what we're going to do to you if you attempt to do what she's doing.
Yep, it's systemic abuse. It's abusive through and through. That comes from them wanting to retain their power. And so they've been very effective at getting women to help them. And some of just the most despicable misogynists out there are other women because of that,
What is very concerning to me is all of these cases of women who couldn't get life-saving abortions, fertility-saving abortions, all of those cases in Texas. Do they just think that it's never going to happen to them or anybody that they know? I mean, because these are, real cases. I mean, women, they've been traumatized.
Yep. So I think that they either think that the chances of it happening to them specifically are low. I don't know how much empathy they actually have, like real empathy they actually have for other women. And I think that they have been groomed to see it as God's will either way. So they will just accept what happens to them based on what they think is God's will. And I think that they try to chalk up the blame to the doctors. They try to chalk up the blame to other things that just aren't related to the ban. They like to scapegoat, whatever they can cling to. It's sort of like every time you hear about a police officer killing a Black person, on the job and stuff like that, they'll cling to anything about the situation. They'll be like, well, of course that, they shouldn't have done this or they shouldn't have done that. And the same kind of thing happens between the doctors and the patients too. It says, well, the doctor could have done it. They just didn't want to risk, being questioned about it or whatever. And I was like, that's the point. That's exactly the point. But they're like, well, they wouldn't have anything to fear if they knew that they were doing what was legally required. I'm like, the point is they don't know if what they're doing is legally permissible, and it's up to somebody else to decide. It's up to their full discretion to decide if it is even legally permissible. And it's like the government holding a gun to the back of a doctor's head and saying, okay, it's your choice. You do what you're going to do, but depending on what you choose, I'll shoot you or not. They're not going to make a decision. And so they don't really understand the nuance around it. And they don't understand and it kind of comes back to that quote by RBG, but you throw away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet. So they have taken for granted all of these years, all of these decades that we've had abortion access, especially, no question about it in emergency situations, right? That they weren't suffering under that. So if they had complicated pregnancies in the past and they were able to get an abortion before Roe was overturned, and they go, well, that'll be an exception now. I was able to get one. Yeah, but you were able to get one when you had that umbrella, right? Now you've thrown that away. So you don't you didn't just throw away an umbrella in this situation. You threw away an actual life raft in the middle of the ocean. So let's just take things into a different perspective here. But I think that I think a lot of them don't want to they don't want to face the cruelty of the situation. They don't want to think that this was about controlling them. They really do want to think it is about saving the babies and stuff like that. And they want to assign some noble, righteous cause to what's going on. They'd rather martyr a woman who dies than actually save her and say it was the most honorable thing for her to do to die for her child, no matter how many other children she might be leaving behind in the world, no matter her life or her ambitions or anything like that. The most noble thing she could do would be to die for her child, even if her child, unborn child, had not had any chance of living anyway. I mean, none of that is really taken into consideration. And so I think that has woken up a lot of women. I think especially a lot of ones who were never really fully invested in the pro-life agenda, but also didn't necessarily think that they were pro-abortion advocates either. I think the reality of the situation has definitely opened some eyes. And I think that's why we're seeing it get voted on and win, even in very red states, is because I've said for a long time, and before Roe was overturned, it is far easier to be pro life when you have a choice or when you know you're protected. And so you throw away that protection, you throw away that life raft, and suddenly things get real. And so,
Well, make no mistake either. The exceptions are not real.
no, the
And,
exceptions are not real at
and
all.
that what they're trying to do at this point is if somebody does need an abortion, instead of, you know, performing an abortion, is they're trying to do C-sections or forced birth early just to prove that abortion is never medically
Mhm.
necessary. So they're putting these women through major abdominal surgery when they could just have a 15-minute procedure
Mhm.
because they want to prove a point that
Yeah.
abortion is not medically necessary.
Right. They have redefined what should be considered medically necessary, and it does not include medical negligence, because in any other situation, putting somebody through major abdominal surgery or forcing them into hours of induced childbirth for a procedure that could otherwise take 15 minutes would be medically negligent. That would be medical battery, especially if it's not fully consented to. That would be, maybe not technically quote unquote necessary, because there is another way to technically get them out of your body, right? So they've redefined that whole scope of necessity, but have eliminated the whole aspect of negligence and increased risk, unnecessary risk, just ignoring consent and somebody not wanting to go through that. And it crosses the line. It absolutely crosses the line. It is not the best practice. So they say, well, it doesn't matter if it's the best practice, it just doesn't have to be medically necessary. And I'm like, okay, so you'll remove a uterus knowing that the fetus will die, but you won't just remove the fetus because that'll be an abortion. That doesn't make any sense. But to them, they think it does. They've twisted this logic and they've done the mental gymnastics to make that make sense. And it doesn't. So yeah, we are going to be seeing much more of that play out, because if it's banned on a federal level, which they don't need much to accomplish, should Trump win this election, there'll be nowhere to airlift these women to out of Idaho or Texas or anywhere else. There'll be nowhere to go. Um, there'll be nowhere to go,
Mm-hmm.
and that's going to make. I mean, this any future children I may have. I already have one, and I've been on the fence about having more children in the future. And I have other health issues I have to take into consideration. But if the stakes of this election, we will be getting sterilized before inauguration day if it's not Kamala Harris who wins. I mean, I'm in a safe state right now in terms of this, where if the status quo was kept, at least for me, not necessarily for other women, which I'm going to be fighting tooth and nail for until we all have that right back.
Right.
But for me specifically, I could continue with my long-term birth control and risk it if I want to, stuff like that. But if they take office, we will not be having more children. And I'm not the only woman out there who's saying that. And That's a sobering reality that we face as a nation, who we're definitely between that and infertility that's going to arise out of these doomed pregnancies and not using the best medical practices, and women just outright abstaining from sex and marriage and dating and stuff together. We are going to be having a full-blown infertility crisis, and that's only going to make their measures more cruel and more invasive. And um, I wouldn't be surprised to see mandated number of children women need to have, stuff like that down the line, if it gets to be that crucial. So you never know.
Let's talk about Project 2025.
Yeah.
What are the most dangerous aspects for us as women?
Mm-hmm. What are the most dangerous? Well, they're going, what Project 2025 essentially does in most respects, beyond even just reproductive rights, is it just incinerates the right to privacy. So, I mean, the right to privacy arose out of Griswold v. Connecticut, which was the birth control case and the privacy penumbra. And that's been used on many cases for through many different aspects of people's lives, to say that these are just decisions that the government shouldn't be involved in, right? Um, in terms of reproductive rights, it absolutely incinerates reproductive rights. And it doesn't take all that much to do so. So essentially, under Project 2025, they don't need Congress to pass a national abortion ban. They do not need to. So a lot of people thinking, well, we may not get the presidency, but I think we'll get Congress, right? We'll get enough support. It won't matter. We need to codify protections. So we need Congress to do that, but then we'd also need a president to sign it, right? So if we don't have a president to sign it, even if we got Congress to pass protections, it wouldn't go through. But they don't need Congress to pass bans. So they can effectively do so with just the presidency. So what this would do is Trump would appoint a new head of the FDA. He would appoint a new head of the Department of Justice. Um, and, we saw mifepristone get remanded back to the lower court. That case did not go away. They're just exploring new standing options. And in combination with the Loper-Bright decision, which overturned Chevron doctrine, which was agency deferring to agency expertise. And there is another case related to that expanded on the idea of statute of limitations and Article 3 standing, injury standing for agency decisions. So instead of there being kind of an arbitrary number of years to bring a suit against an agency for an agency decision, now you can bring a suit when the injury itself actually arises. So even if it's 3 decades later, 4 decades later, something like that, you can bring a suit related to that. That's all tailored toward making getting rid of mifepristone very possible once it gets back up the ladder after the election. So, and a lot of this is just already in motion, even if Trump doesn't win. I mean, they've already established this precedent. They've already overturned Chevron doctrine. They've already made a lot of these decisions that is going to make if we get a Democrat in office and we get Congress, it is going to make their job harder. But I think there's an urgency around it that if we can get that trifecta, they will plow through and get as many protections codified as they can. But also the EMTALA ruling, that was not actually decided on either. And that can come right back to the court, because they fought over the injunction in that case at the lower district court level, where they put an injunction on the law that said they couldn't enforce it in those health and life of the mother situations while it was litigated. And then they fought that injunction all the way up through the Ninth Circuit and to SCOTUS, but they didn't actually fight the law itself. So they tried to bypass the Ninth Circuit essentially and say, okay, we're going to take this to SCOTUS, but they used the injunction to get it to SCOTUS. They didn't use the actual merits of the case to get it to SCOTUS. But then when they argued in front of the SCOTUS, they argued the merits of the case. And so that's why SCOTUS basically bumped it back and said, no, we're going to let the injunction stand so they can't enforce it while this continues to be litigated. We now realize that they have bypassed a huge part of this procedural process, and the Ninth Circuit never actually weighed in. The district court never actually weighed in on the merits of the case, right? None of those courts weighed in on the merits of the case. We can't be the first court to weigh in on the merits of the case because there's nobody over us to question our decision, right? So that's why you go up the ladder, so that there's somebody over you to question that decision. If you don't decide on the merits of a case at a lower court level, the Supreme Court becomes essentially like the trial court in the situation. That's not how they're supposed to function. So that got kicked down as well, and will be back after the election for them to decide on. And all of this is going to have really devastating effects when they no longer have the election weighing on them, and knowing that abortion wins at the ballot, right? Knowing that women will turn out if the Supreme Court were to come out and say, no, we don't value your lives. The right to life doesn't apply to you, right? If you're pregnant, sort of thing. But they can after, right? They can after. And if we get under Project 2025, if we get these agency heads appointed by Trump and his administration, they're going to have a much easier time doing so.
So, it was amazing to me with this EMTALA case where there was this, I think it was 2 states that sued that they weren't going to, as you just mentioned, perform abortions to save the life of the woman.
Right. There was Idaho, which the federal government sued Idaho, but in Texas sued the federal government.
Okay, yeah. So, and I remember hearing some of that, play out. How many organs would a woman have to lose before? I mean, like, how do we get to a place where we're, trying to figure out that a woman, her life is not valued if there's a baby involved? And the thing that has always really stuck with me the most is, how is it that women are not outraged and marching in the streets over this every day? I mean, they're basically telling us they don't care if we live or die.
I know. That's something that baffles me. We don't see that rage come through where we're just marching in the streets and stuff. And I think a lot of that is just by design. I mean, we're so, with the amount of work that even working mothers end up shouldering, domestic workload, kids, everything else. And just throughout, it's just so ingrained in the culture that we as women are supposed to put everybody else's needs before us. And I see it a lot, even just with other aspects of activism, which I am fully in support of, right? But you see this notion that says that this is a women's issue, or this is a feminist issue, or this is also, and I agree it is, but the way it's framed is like add this to your burden as feminists to fight for too. So then you end up with this overwhelmingly heavy backpack of shit you're fighting for on behalf of everybody else, because they see it as like the mother of all movements. And I'm like, if we actually hyper focused on us, if we hyper focused on women and establishing our rights, we would have the power to then fight for all of these other things as well. But when you load it all onto the front end of it, there's no way to stretch us that thin and still actually accomplish anything. And so I think, you'll see people going out to all of these different kinds of you can't go to every protest, you can't go to every issue, you can't go to this. And then if you do hyper focus on feminist issues, you get targeted as you don't care about the other things too.
Right.
And it's a nightmare. Yeah. It's a nightmare to navigate. And I think there's been just so much stigma around feminism for so long that I don't see us really ever getting to a point where we just, start bashing things and burning stuff down. That's not going to be how women handle this. But I do think we can more stealthily maneuver our way through the system and kind of, hit them where it hurts. But I don't think we're going to see some sort of female revolution arise. If you look at like what happened with the women's strike and everything else, I mean, it was next to nothing. I mean, I didn't really expect it to be much, but we get scapegoated for the pitfalls of capitalism. Essentially, it's just, they'll say, oh, look, you're not around your kids enough, or you're not, taking care of this enough, or, oh, you focus so much on your career, you never got married, you never fulfilled other aspects of your life, blah, 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 blah. And they say that's feminism. No, it's not. It's capitalism. It's because we are trying to operate within a system that is not built for us. It's not built for us. We need a new system that can accommodate all of that, right? And that's what we're fighting against. We're fighting against that system, but they have said that we are fighting against men, and that's not the same thing, you know? So it's very distorted, and a lot of people don't understand what feminism means. A lot of people who might actually be feminists at heart don't want the name. They don't want the stigma around it. They think it's such a messy place to be. Essentially, it is such a messy place to be that, you know, I don't think we are how do they put that, the frogs in the pot that don't realize they're boiling until they're
Yes.
boiling. Like, that's where we're at.
Yeah,
You
you're
know, we need to
slowly
be
turning
jumping
the
out of that
temperature up.
pot.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we're not, because we don't, not everybody feels it yet. Some of us are looking around going, come on guys, let's go. Hop away. But not enough of us are, and a lot of us don't want to leave those people behind too, you know. And so it's a very messy and complicated place to be. And I hope that I really hope that we can pull off this election, because I think it'll be a major turning point, actually seeing what it would be like to have a leader, a woman leader, especially somebody from a marginalized community. Like, I'm in the camp that I don't think white women deserve to have the first female presidency. I'm like, it's such a hit or miss with us. You have the Ruth Bader Ginsburgs and the Elena Kagans and stuff, but you also have the Aaron Holleys and the Amy Barretts and everything, you know?
Right.
So, yeah.
One of the things I'm very excited about with Harris running is, instead of Biden, is he always seemed uh, very hesitant and even afraid to use the word abortion.
Yes.
So this is going to be a front and center issue, which is what it needed to be. I mean, this is what
Right.
really is getting women to, come together and to, fight against the taking away of our, just our bodily autonomy. I mean, it's just that
Right.
basic. So I'm very
Right.
excited to see that. Um, and, at this point, we've got to be all in, right?
You have to be all in. You have to be all in. And what I keep telling people is, like, once this nomination is locked in, whether it's Harris or somebody else, which it would be stupid to put in anybody else at this point, which, with how much support has rallied around her. So I'm assuming it's going to be Harris. But once it is fully locked in, the only person you compare Harris to is Trump, because that's the only alternative you have.
Right.
Right. So you can't keep comparing them to who you wish got the nomination instead. You don't compare her to Biden if you were in the Biden camp. You don't compare her to your progressive fantasy dream that might not even be somebody that even exists in politics. Okay. Like, you don't compare it to your ideal anymore. That's a primary mindset that you use in the primaries to determine who you want to be the nominee. That is not the mindset you use in the general election when your choices are clear. You know, if I told you you could eat a plate of pickles or you could eat a plate of baby diarrhea, would you start comparing the plate of pickles to a cheesecake, or well, I'd rather have a bunch of chocolate covered strawberries,
Right.
or something like that? It's like, that's not your choices here. If you don't pick the plate of pickles, you get the plate of baby diarrhea.
Right.
Okay. Like, so whatever you come out with against Harris, and overall, I do very much like Harris. I liked her in 2022. There are, some policy issues and stuff that, nobody's perfect, right? Nobody's perfect, but I have always liked Harris. But again, you don't compare that to anything else at that point. You compare it to what your alternative is. And the alternative is Trump, and a freaking post-it note with googly eyes should be able to win an election against Trump. So it doesn't really matter all the other things. Like, that's what you need to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of people lose sight of that. And I'm hoping that what's the saying? It goes, Republicans fall in line and Democrats have to fall in love. I'm like, you don't have to fall in love with your soulmate. You just have to.
Yeah, and that's what they do. They think that they have to 100% align with a candidate,
Yeah.
and it's just, that's never going to happen.
Never going to happen. That is never going to happen.
Yes.
And even when people who say, well, they have to earn my vote, and it's like, everybody who votes can say that. And everybody has a different agenda and a different ideology and a different, set of priorities, right? Everybody gets to say that. It is not just you. So everybody has to compromise to a certain point to get the closest to where they want to go, right? And so you can't be looking for your soulmate at the polls. You look for your soulmate when you're recruiting. You look for your soulmate when you're trying to get people to run for office. There's a time and place to look for that soulmate, right? And it's not 30 seconds before the election. That's just essentially
and it's not when you're running against Trump.
Yeah, especially not when you're running against Trump. So
okay.
Yeah, it's
Well, Emily, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time and going over some of these things with me. I don't know if I mentioned I'm actually running for office myself. I'm running for my town council here in
nice.
in my home area. Very, very sea of red that I live in. I mean, I just am so lucky to live in New Jersey but be surrounded by red.
Oh, I know the feeling. I live in California and I grew up in what is now Trump country of California. So I hear you. Yeah, it's hard.
It'll be an uphill climb, but yeah, we're going all in this year. So thank you for taking the time, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm always happy to jump on your podcast. So
thank you for joining me in this conversation. Together, we are better. Please visit my website at hopefulist.com and remember to hit that subscribe or follow button.